breakfast.
Good morning, and welcome to Comics for Breakfast, number 18 even. I'm your host, Jason Mink. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to take a sharp left turn from our usual Comics Archives picks, and we're going to head on over to the small but equally interesting box of coverless comics. Now, over the years, coverless comic books have been the bastard child of collectors. They've been kept around by many only as a last resort to afford books or runs that otherwise might be unaffordable. Now, for as long as I can remember, the coverless comic has had a negative stigma attached to it, one that I simply have never shared. Now, my family didn't have a lot of extra coin growing up, and when I was a kid, I was a voracious reader, so I learned to be less picky to feed my habits. Now, sure, the other kids at school, well, they might look down at a coverless book, but I felt they were missing the forest for the trees. After all, the good stuff was on the inside. Now, in spite of being a little harder to find these days, I've amassed some really nifty coverless books, 3 of which we're going to look at today. But don't worry, thanks to the miracle of modern technology, we'll be able to actually see the covers that my books are missing. It's truly the best of both worlds, folks. Let's get right to it. We're going to begin with Charlton Comics' World of Wheels, number 30, from the heady days of February 1970. In our first story, Ol' Fusspot, Jerry Wren is putting the third coat of wax on his cherry red GTX when Walton and his gang of miscreants catch sight of him. They douse the aforementioned pot of fuss, his girl, and his car with buckets of slop, giving him a punch in the gut for his troubles. Jerry's fed up with their shenanigans, but what can he do to put them in their place? If you said, beat 'em in a road race, well, you've been paying attention. Jerry challenges Walton and his gang not for cash or pink slips, but instead their love beads and vests. Walton, confident that he can smoke his opponent, agrees, but that little GTX, he don't know what it's got. Jerry wins and offers a double or nothing. He'll return the gang's gear if they win, but if they lose, they have to bathe and shave. Now, I credit Stan Lee, among others, for helping to build my childhood vocabulary, but at no time do I remember him dropping the word scrofulous into a comic. Hey, if I missed it, let me know in the comments section below. In spite of all of Walton's tricks, he loses again, and remarkably, he and his gang go along with the bet, cleaning up their acts. Even more remarkable, they're washing Jerry's car, and they're going to do it every Saturday for 6 months. Man, what happened to all of the honorable hoodlums, huh? Next up, it's Aunt Gert's Grocery Grabber, because alliteration is pleasing. Teen mechanic Ozzy gets his big chance to race his Doc's funny car, but burns up the motor. Doc gives him a sock on the jaw, but it's no hard feelings. With no joy in Mudville tonight, Ozzy heads home to his Aunt Gert, who is clearly hot stuff under those glasses. She and Oz go car shopping, and Gertie picks out a real gasser in the form of a black 2-door Roadrunner. Auntie digs this jazz. She thinks this new set of wheels is a real kick, and she signs on the dotted line, letting Ozzy drive. Later, the kid drops in on Doc at the track, but it's Aunt Gert who gets the race promoter's attention. Turns out she's a total smoke show under all that dowdy frump, and it seems like she's got the hots for old Doc. Next up, it's Ken King in The Fall Guy. I guess Lee Majors had better things to do. We join Ken's adventure already in progress as he's clotheslined from his motorcycle and set upon by two beshadowed thugs. They seem to think Ken is someone he's not, and our hero doesn't stick around long enough to set them straight. He makes a break for the highway, but his bike conks out, and he's forced to take a room for the night. And because Ken has offended the motorcycle gods, he is set upon by two of the invaders. No, sadly not Cap and company, but instead a group of bikers out on a spree. Ken is on the receiving end of more physical abuse, and because this is a Charlton comic, they tie him up instead of stomping a mud hole in his ass. If Ken can beat the gang in a motorcycle race, they'll allow him to go free. Once again, they may be a no-good gang of antisocial deviants, but Hoochie and his pals? Honorable. The next morning, the race is on. What follows is an all-out brawl with fists, chains, and all the leaping action that Ken here is presumably known for. In the end, the invaders are busted, and Ken King rides off into the sunset, singing. Moving on, our second book of the morning, and it's Aquaman number 39, volume number 1. A sparkling comet jets into Earth's atmosphere and vanishes beneath the ocean waves. The energy manifests in the form of an achingly beautiful woman named Ayteen, and she's spotted her target. Meanwhile, nearby, Mira's seahorse gives Aquaman a playful slap, knocking her husband from his mount. Aquaman grouses, but before he can giddy up, he's ensnared in a hard water trap and hurled at the mountains. Now, I've heard of hard water, but I always thought it was a plumbing-related issue. I didn't think it could kill you. At the last moment, Aquaman is saved by the beauticious Ayteen, but she is seemingly knocked out for her effort. Aquaman comes down hard on Mira, accusing her of nearly killing him, and she rightfully leaves the big jerk. This leaves Aquaman susceptible to Ayteen's considerable charms, and she gives him the lowdown. She was thrown into our world from a neighboring water dimension where there was a deadly urethrium explosion. Some of this urethrium ended up in our dimension and is slowly poisoning Ayteen. Played like an $80 Japanese bass, Aquaman goes along with this tale and has his whale buddies cap the deadly substance in a deep underwater cave. Problem solved. Grateful, Ayteen trades a little seawater with Goldilocks here before swimming off. Turns out she's a Mata Hari type sent here to kill the Sea King. She reports back to Carl, perhaps the most inspired of villain names. Black Manta? Too obvious. Killer Shark? That's just corny. But Carl? Oh, we've all known a Carl. You can forget those other undersea villains. Someone who sounds like they're the daytime manager at your local Long John Silver's is clearly the ideal Aquaman villain. Ayteen drops some mysterious pellets into an undersea volcano, getting it to reawaken, but she's caught up by some seaweed as she attempts to escape. Aquaman streaks in to save her, and we get a spectacular 2-page spread showing the explosion, the aftermath, and Aquaman hiding under a turtle. Meanwhile, some more of these blue guys show up looking for the first batch, who are apparently an invasion force previously responsible for an attempted coup of the planet Mercury. For being a Carl, this guy is highly motivated. With his invasion fleet nullified, Carl decides to have Aquaman killed once and for all, but Ayteen isn't up for the challenge. She loves the big blonde clod, and Carl and his boys take it upon themselves to kill the Sea King. Is it all up for Aquaman? Nah. Aqualad shows up, gets in the middle of the action long enough for Ayteen to betray Carl. She's dug up the deadly urethrium to save Aquaman, and in moments both she and her goateed boyfriend are food for the bottom feeders. It's a pretty bleak ending, ironically underscored by an episode of Cap's Hobby Hints, where Dad tells Junior how to put fresh water in the aquarium without killing all of the fish. So much for pathos. Now, this tale was written by Bob Haney, and it's a decent enough read. The whole Aquaman being a jerk to Mira thing is kind of odd and isn't even resolved by the end of this issue. At this point, Aquaman and Mira were married, and there was even an aqua baby swimming around, so having him yell at his wife and making out with another chick, well, that seemed very odd. That said, when the other chick is drawn by Nick Cardy, you can almost understand. Nick Cardy's work on this title is legendary, and you can see why. His underwater realms are both lovely and believable. These aren't just regular characters drawn against a blue background. Cardy makes it a point to impart a fluidity and grace to the characters' poses and movements that is a true pleasure to look at. Now, our final book of the day was a bit of a mystery, as without its cover, I had no idea what it was. Surprise! It's Fight Against Crime number 8 by Story Comics, issued in June of 1952. And what a comic! Strangler Snake's revenge concerns gangsters Rocky and Shadow, who are on the lam from the heat. Rocky puts them up in a cave outside of town that has to deal with the cave's poisonous residents first, a pair of mated rainbow snakes. Passive when together, the snakes become incredibly dangerous when separated, or so the comic would have us believe. In reality, rainbow snakes are non-venomous, and your odds of even finding one, let alone convincing them to bite you, are extremely high. Anyway, Rocky kills the first snake and makes a lucky belt out of it in the space of an hour, in a cave with no tanning supplies. It's safe to say that he's holding his pants up with a dead snake tied in a knot. Once the heat's off, Rocky heads back into town to see his number one gal, Rose Marie. But Rosie's heart now belongs to Duke, a high-rolling con from Ojai. Duke tells her to string Rocky along, and they'll put the bag on him later. Meanwhile, the cops rub out Rex Perko, head of the Southside Mob, and Rocky absorbs his gang. He uses his new muscle for his biggest job yet, but there's a snake in the mix, and it ain't a belt. Rose Marie gives Duke the inside skinny, and they plan to roll on Rocky later that night. They cross the gangster up, steal his lucky belt, and head back to the cave to lay low. And hey, remember the rainbow's deadly mate? Well, its sense of timing is pretty much perfect, showing up to deliver the snaky denouement. Strangler Snake's Revenge features some early Pete Morisi art. We've seen Morisi's work before on Comics for Breakfast in the form of Vengeance Incorporated number 5. Morisi's art is pretty raw here. The composition and overall aesthetic of his later work not quite present. That said, the art is more than serviceable, and I do like the way he draws the snakes. Robbing the payroll from the Nathan Chemical Company, Lucky Keeler and his mob are on the run. We flash back to events of 24 hours previous, where we find small-time criminal Stan Beach getting invited along on his first big job. Stan is eager to prove to the other guys he's not as green as they think, but the kid comes apart like a cheap suit. He ditches his partners the first chance he gets, slamming a cemetery gate to leave them for the pursuing cops. Stan goes underground, but decides he needs a weapon to protect himself until the heat blows over. No one will sell him a gun, so he settles for a knife. A very particular knife, with a deadly history. Stan steals the blade and, with a bit of practice, becomes proficient with the antiquated weapon. Before you know it, he's on a crime spree, calling himself the Knifer. I know, Spoonie D and Mother Forker better look out. The cops slowly get a lead on Knifey here, but the surviving Lucky Killer has a score to settle. He surprises Stan, who does what Stan does best, but then the Knife of Death does what it does best, by popping out a second concealed blade to knife the Knifer. I guess this is meant to be a shake-your-head-at-the-irony kind of thing, but honestly, it makes about as much sense as a lucky snake belt, so we're just gonna move on. In Death Backfired, hitchhiker Dave Lorman is in the wrong place at the right time, ending up smack dab in the middle of a diner holdup. Dave manages to thwart the robbery and ends up landing a job as a burger flipper in the process. And while that's fine for starters, it's the boss's wife, Lorraine, that he decides on for dessert. And while she resists at first, it's not long before she succumbs to Dave's ketchupy passions. And it seems old Herman is fine with it. He even tells them to have a good time together at the movies. The two hash out a plot to kill the helpless old codger by cutting his brake line, and before you can say today's special, Herman is pushing up daisies. And guess what? The old codger had a great little insurance premium that just paid out, and it looks like our conniving couple is on easy street. But it's not to be, as suspicion runs deeper than love, and Lorraine is certain Dave is trying to off her now, too. She freaks out midway to the couple's vacation. Herman's blood inexplicably starts coming out of the floor, and she's killed by crashing into a tree. Dave is sentenced on some pretty flimsy charges and ends up in the hangman's noose. And finally, we come to the shaft of death. And no, that's not a Ron Jeremy film. Bandit Stud Bishop robs a bank, but the caper goes sideways. The cops show up, gun down Stud's men, and leave him winged and bleeding out. With nowhere else to go, Stud heads to the basement of the Monarch Hotel, where his father tends the elevators and the incinerator. Dad, a well-known arsonist of the past, decides to help his son dodge the cops. He hides the kid in the incinerator because, hey, what could possibly happen? Dad gets the bright idea to kill a guy and loot him, pushing him down the elevator shaft. Stud wisely decides that his pop has lost it and tries to flee, but he's in no shape to travel with his wounded shoulder, and he heads back to his hiding place. Just then, in another part of the hotel, a guest gets a chill and asks for the heat in her room to be turned up. Studs is burned alive, and Dad follows, gunned down by the cops and falling down into the hotel chimney. So yeah, these stories, they're pretty grim. In less than 3 years' time, crime comics like this would be a thing of the past, thanks to the passing of the Comics Code. But in 1952, why, this little number was available on the newsstand next to Patsy and Hetty, Rex the Wonder Dog, and Dottie Dripple. What a world, huh? Hey, I hope that you enjoyed this look at our coverless classics. If so, please consider heading on over to the Old Guys Who Like Old Comics swag shop and ordering a t-shirt, a mug, or one of the other fine products. All of the proceeds go directly to the Old Guys Who Like Old Comics network, which produces the kind of content that you can only see right here. I'm Jason Mink, and I hope to see you next week at breakfast.